Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Hello, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you very much, everybody who is already clicking go with us this evening and choosing to spend a little bit of time with us talking about such an important topic tonight, which is well-being. We know it's been talked about a lot, but I don't think there's ever enough that it can be talked about. So tonight's another opportunity to talk about what it is, what it isn't, and the strategies and practical tools that we can maybe use in the classroom, in schools, and even just the ecosystem around schools to try and make things better. I thought I would start on a slightly lighter note before I introduce our guests and what we're going to be talking about. Yesterday, I put out a little question on X about what teacher well-being isn't. Some of the top replies, the sentence is complete as it is. So teacher well-being isn't, full stop. So thank you for that, bewildered, saddened and angry on Twitter. Ian says, teacher well-being isn't a priority for an incoming Labour government, evidence suggests. I question that one. Miss N says, teacher well-being isn't scheduling 3 parents' evenings, a twilight and an options evening into a 6-week term, and then putting biscuits in the staff room to say thanks. Lots of people said yoga. Yoga always gets a hard time. It always gets battered, doesn't it, on these things? Somebody said also, donuts and cake always get battered. I don't know why Sunita's just gone. I mentioned yoga and she's left. I mentioned yoga and cake and she's gone. We got Miss Fusco, who said handing out a secret mug filled with refreshers on someone's desk. Anyway, it went on and on like that, as you could probably predict. But tonight we're going to be spending less on what it isn't and a little bit more on what it is, and also how we can actually support it and help with it. So if you haven't heard of Teach Well Toolkit, Teach Well Toolkit is a multi-award winning company owned by Steve and Sunita, who are both here this evening, or will be. And they aim to equip school communities to build a culture of staff well-being and improving mental health. They are also a DFE approved provider of the Senior Mental Health Lead Program and have trained over 100 schools to date. And we're going to be looking at how they help schools just for them as a company, but also just in general, and maybe some ideas that people might have just in general to how they can support well-being within their school. And Steve and Sunita themselves are qualified MHFA instructors and mindfulness teachers, and they have a portfolio of skills to support school staff, including counselling, coaching, supervision, and mediation, which we will talk a little bit about this evening. So to kick off tonight, I thought it would be a good time, actually, just before we say or do anything. If at any point during the show tonight you are thinking to yourself, I'm quite interested in finding out more, just at a very basic level about what we're talking about, then we've got a little QR code which we'll put up on screen now. We'll put it up later on as well. But if you would like to find out a little bit more, you can scan that QR code which is on screen now, and you can just submit your email and we will get in touch with you about well-being. All things well-being. If you click that QR, just submit your email in there, and we'll be in touch with some follow-ups from the discussion tonight, either on a personal level or a school level. So I've given you a little introduction there, Steve and Sunita, but maybe it might be better now if I ask you both, and it's up to you who goes first. Can you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and how and why you founded the Teach Well Toolkit. Steve, I don't know if you want to go first or.
Yeah, that's fine. Just to say that I am going to be talking now and during the programme about my own mental health experiences. If anyone finds it distressing, just mute. And when I've finished, I'll just raise my hand to indicate that I'm not going to talk about it anymore at this stage. So I taught for 30 years English and drama, and I was a local authority advisor for 6. Throughout my teaching career and my advisory post, I suffered from depressive episodes. And in 2008, 3 years before I left the advisory post, I fell into a very deep depression, nearly ended my own life, and then spent 3 months in a psychiatric hospital. During that time, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and fortunately, the treatment and the support was excellent. And because I'd been correctly diagnosed, they were able to trial a number of combinations of medication. And fortunately, I found a combination that worked. And I have been taking it ever since and will take it for the rest of my life. And fortunately, I haven't had a repeat episode of depression or mania or bipolar disorder combined. So the reason I mention this is because it's a driving force behind my desire to support individual teachers and their schools, because I realize that mental health is quite difficult for some people to talk about. And whenever I talk about it, other people then start to talk about their own experiences. And it's very unusual to find an individual teacher who hasn't either experienced mental ill health themselves or whose family hasn't experienced mental ill health. But generally in the workplace, school as a workplace, we don't tend to talk about it. It's a bit of a taboo subject. And that isn't peculiar to schools. It's a reflection of what happens in workplaces around the country and in different settings. So one of the things that we will be discussing is how a workplace can contribute to mental health, or conversely, how it can contribute to mental ill health. And when Tom started the program tonight and mentioned several things that were that teachers found irksome, he was talking about individual gestures of mental well-being. And while there's nothing wrong with having biscuits in the staff room or cakes on a Friday or doing yoga for that matter, we won't be focusing on individual strategies to support mental health. We'll be talking about supporting mental health in the workplace. So I finished now. Sunita.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm a teacher, first and foremost. I'm really proud of that. And a school leader who is passionate and committed to the well-being of all of those that work in education. And how we came to be the founders of Teach Well Toolkit, I think, as Steve has mentioned, there's always a personal driver. And for me, as an individual, I always had to manage my own mental health before I came into the profession. And that was due to living in a home environment where mental health was highly prevalent. However, due to the shame of stigma, and that's one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about teaching and educating and training others about mental health, is because the shame of stigma is something that can keep people very, very stuck and fearful, and does the opposite of what we're trying to achieve in terms of getting people to talk about mental health and have those conversations. But sadly, due to the shame of stigma, my mum never spoke about what she was experiencing. However, her behaviour communicated that. So she never got the help that she needed. And growing up, as you can imagine, an environment like that wasn't easy. And I turned to self-help and personal development from a really young age. I was definitely, I remember kind of being in the book sections of personal development and self-help from about 18. And I noticed, as I was evolving myself and developing a more positive mindset, they were really good. They were just really good skills and strategies to be able to help me enter into the teaching profession. And so having those sort of skills, even whilst I was training, made me realize that I was a better teacher as a result. And then in 2012, when I became a senior leader, I discovered the power of coaching and had, used the coaching methodology and the coaching leadership approach ever since in all of the roles that I've had. And as my career's progressed and I became a head teacher, I've always continued to invest in my personal and professional development. I've received coaching and supervision. But really at the heart of it, I want to ensure that we're raising the profile of all of those different ways that people can help themselves, teachers, leaders, support staff, everybody in the school community. And I think that, I'm a firm believer that we all have a sense of responsibility to be able to look after ourselves. We entered the teaching profession for a reason. There was a calling, a service, a vocation, whatever anybody wants to call it. I know it's a very personal choice. And I feel that that we should then take responsibility to be able to look after ourselves. And therefore, I've trained in a variety of modalities that I know have helped me, but also that can support my colleagues in education. So Steve and I initially started to work together in 2019, which was before the pandemic. And at that time, we were supporting individuals and schools through providing first aid training for mental health. And then in 2021, we set up Teach Well Toolkit as the demand for services grew. And as mentioned, we are DFE approved trainers for senior mental health lead. And alongside that, we provide training to be able for primary and secondary age school children. So we're very, very firm in what we do, and that is whole school. We're very, very committed to providing a culture of well-being, and that includes everybody in the school community, staff and pupils alike. And it's really important that we state that, we continue to state that we're equally committed to staff and students, because we think it's really difficult for teachers in the classroom and support staff to be able to support those young people with mental health conditions if A, they're not receiving the level of support that they need themselves, but B, they're not trained to spot the signs of mental health conditions. So that's a little bit of where we are and why we're doing what we're doing. You're on mute.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. I was just sort of reflecting on that and thinking that, with me, my sort of personal journey as well in terms of, mental health. And, in 2010, I was diagnosed with cyclothymia. And then since then, we're going over 14 years now. And sort of learning to manage it and the experiences you have with it, and then being able to recognize and be more, basically I've just grown more and more aware over time. And then because of that, I've been able to function much better. Obviously I've had 3 rounds of different pills, different prescriptions for that, but also there's a recognition as well that nowadays I can cope much better without medication. I cope much better just from experience, awareness, triggers, knowledge, and obviously the support of other people as well. So I know we're going to talk about your mental health first aid training, and I'm sure that within that there's a heck of a lot of what I've just mentioned within that and built into it for staff and individuals who have that story. Go on, Steve. Did you want to sort of say something?
Well, I was just going to ask Tom, would you mind just explaining what psychothymia is?
Yeah, so psychothymia is a, well, I mean, it's described by Stephen Fry as bipolar light.
Right.
That's how he describes it as. He describes it as bipolar light. Now, to sort of well, you'll know this, Steve, to get any sort of mental health diagnosis, you can't just sort of, I mean, that was over a long period of time, and then but also it's one of them where someone can have that and not be treated for it. It's something that you can manage within your daily life, unless you have, I guess, a crash, in which case you may seek further help or whatever else from there. I would say I've probably done that a couple of times, but there's no real way of knowing how or why or when that might happen. So it's a case of just sort of learn, get the experience and awareness. And the older you get, well, I've found anyway, for me, the older you get, the better it is, the easier it is to deal with, better it is to manage, and there's less incidences and there's more awareness of it. I mean, when I was 21, there was no sort of conversation about mental health, really. I mean, there was the odd thing, but nothing like today. There was no, even when I started teaching, there was barely anything. So I think things have improved, and obviously the facilitation of things like what we're going to talk about tonight plays into that. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting because I didn't explain what bipolar disorder was either, but in the past it's been termed manic depression, which is a term that was kind of commonly coined, and like you, I used to experience significant episodes of depression followed by episodes of mania, which actually weren't recognized. And because I didn't report them, I only went to the GP when I was in a serious episode of depression. And the reason I mention that is that when I was coming out of a depression and then when I was returning to school, there were times I can see now looking back when my episode of mania affected how I was teaching, and in some cases could have put me at genuine risk. So it was really important that I was given a diagnosis. However, the average time for someone to be diagnosed with bipolar is 20 years. So it's during that period of time, someone has either, has had to cope on their own, and so when we work with teachers and we train the first aid for mental health, there are some mental health conditions which are obvious and some which are hidden, and it's learning how to observe the signs that are hidden both in teachers and in pupils. That is really important because that's the first step in getting someone help.
Yeah, and I mean, like alluding back to what I've said is, things have changed. When in 2010, when I talked to, I decided to speak to my line managers about things, and they were excellent, and we're going back now to 2010, when there was no sort of, conversations, if you like, about it on a regular basis, but they were really good, so and the way things have progressed now, there is more hope. Unfortunately, we won't talk about the wider issues of funding in the country and all the rest of it. That'll save that for another day, and the services available. But in terms of there are many positive things that have happened, and things are better in terms of the openness to have a conversation and talk about it, so that's really good. I mean, fortunately, Steve, I've never with me, I've never had, I guess, what you're describing, which is that full on manic episode, I guess, is what they would describe that as in medical terms. I just get sort of racing thoughts and you know, maybe I can't sleep for a bit, or I get very intense. I also get very hilarious, which is another byproduct of it. Which, you know, if I'm having a few days like that, it's great, it's funny. But you know, but equally when you're on downtime and there's no one else around you to be funny for other than yourself, and you sort of sat there in a dark room, that's where the flip side of that sort of manicness can come into play. But to be fair, for me, I think for me it's been more about anxiety than depression. Even though I've had some pretty severe depressive episodes over the years. This feels like a massive counselling session now, Steve. I don't know how much you're charging me for this, but you know I'm dreading it. But let's move on a little bit. So, Steve, you did a recent Twitter poll. And I know you're quite concerned with with burnout as a concept. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've done both Twitter polls, and we use another platform where head teachers can estimate their own risk of burnout, because burnout is one of those conditions, if you like, which creep up on people, and they report being very tired, being irritable, not being able to concentrate very well, getting home from school and just feeling like going to sleep. And before they kind of know it, they're in a full phase of burnout. So burnout is not just physical tiredness, it is mental exhaustion to the point where somebody can't physically continue. They have to stop. And we all know, don't we, that teachers, because of a range of factors, some of it to do with their own pride, some of it to do with not letting their colleagues down, some of it not wanting to let the children down, they often turn into work where they should be staying at home. And so they push through. And there are some workplaces, some schools that unfortunately have a tendency to celebrate when somebody turns into work when they're feeling ill. And if you're feeling mentally unwell to the point where you feel that you're almost unable to function, it actually is very detrimental to you to refuse to stop. So one of the questions really that we explore is, you know, at what stage did you feel that you should have stopped, and did you stop, and what happened when you didn't? And so we find that in the two polls that up to 49% of head teachers feel that they are heading for burnout. And we've just got to look at the statistics of teachers and head teachers leaving the profession to know that we're in a crisis. And the crisis is mental health, or rather mental ill health. Teachers have never left the profession in the numbers that we are seeing. And there are several groups on Twitter dedicated to teachers who are considering leaving the profession or who have left the profession. And in those groups, people share anonymously, they share their own experiences. And I would say a good 80% of those people are either thinking about leaving teaching or have left teaching because of burnout, either a fear that they're going to burn out or they've reached that point. So we can see very easily that schools are not equipped to respond sometimes to teachers' mental ill health. Now, I'm not blaming schools for that, because, and I think this is a really critical point, none of the NPQs, not even the NPQH, which is the professional qualification for head teachers, includes any leadership responsibility for mental health in the school as a workplace. And I think this is a serious omission. If we are not training leaders to be able to manage the workplace so that they promote mental health, the danger is that unwittingly they may be contributing to it. And no one sets out to deliberately make somebody mentally unwell. However, there are certain factors in the workplace that lead to teachers burning out. And we, on the screen now, you've got 6 of those factors. So Christina Maslach is a world authority on workplace burnout. And as long ago as 1975, she identified these 6 factors as critical in promoting or endangering employees. And she said that the more of these factors you are experiencing, the more likely it is that you will be experiencing burnout. So the first, these are not in any order, by the way. So the first, work overload. And I like the term work overload more than workload, because work overload means that you're doing too much of it. Workload is just what you're expected to manage. So work overload, as it suggests, is that you either don't have the time or the resources or both to fulfill what is expected of you in your job. Then lack of control. Professional people especially, they value being in control of their own profession. They've trained, they've got unique skills, and they feel that they should be given the responsibility and trust to do their jobs. However, there is a problem because the government and the DfE, and sometimes they're synonymous, attempt to impose control from the outside. The curriculum is one indicator of that, but there are many others. And we, at the moment, are in a discussion about Ofsted and whether Ofsted should continue in its present form. Because when Ofsted inspects schools, the message that it sends is that A, you can't be trusted to self-evaluate. So we've got to come in and do it for you, because we know what would happen if we didn't. You know, there'd be absolute chaos and people would be doing what they chose to do, etc. All those arguments, which of course are nonsense. But then, so we've got Ofsted imposing control, we've got the government imposing control, the DfE imposing control. And because schools are under the microscope, then it's a very tricky job to be a head teacher and allow staff to teach, to give them trust, while all of these external indicators are monitoring them. But if we take away control from the individual classroom teacher, and the more that it's imposed from the centre, the more likely it is that they will feel a lack of morale, a despondency. We're not trusted. We've got to teach. We've got to teach in a certain way. We've got to use scripts. We've got to behave in a certain way in the classroom. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that we don't need consistency in schools. Of course we do. But the penalty for being micromanaged is that you don't feel valued as a professional. So a lack of reward. We all know that pay is an issue, but that's not the only reward. It is as simple as asking someone the question, when was the last time in work that somebody said, you've done a really good job, excellent, well done? And that sounds like almost a question that doesn't need any, it doesn't need asking. But actually, when you ask teachers that, some say, you know what, I can't remember the last time someone said that. Or, well, yes, about 6 weeks ago. Now, so affirming someone's competence and ability costs nothing. And we exhort teachers, don't we, in the classroom to make sure that they affirm students' ability, but also their effort irrespective of ability. And that we make sure that we tell them that they've done well and also how they've done well. It's the same for teachers. We're all human. We all need that affirmation. And then a lack of community. So the question here is, in an individual teacher in a school, do they feel part of a whole, part of people working together, or do they feel isolated? And we find often with burnout, the teachers who burn out feel isolated. Whether that's a perspective, whether that perspective is inaccurate or not, doesn't really matter. If the teacher is feeling that they are not part of the community, then something is not happening with that teacher to make them feel part of the community if it exists. I just want to read out the explanation from Maslach about what that means, because I think it's really important. So Maslach said, people thrive in community and function best when they share praise, comfort, happiness, and humour with people they like and respect. In addition to emotional exchange and instrumental assistance, this kind of social support reaffirms a person's membership in a group with shared values. And just to focus on keywords: praise, comfort, happiness, humour. I'm often asked by people going on interview, what would you, what should I look for in a school? When I go around the school, what should I be looking for? And my advice is very simple. If you don't see people laughing, if you don't see people sharing a joke, if the pupils are not laughing, if you go into the staff room and it's almost silent, there is a problem in that school. Now, I'm not saying that people should go around, laughing all the time, but in an organization, in a community, laughing and humor is just part of interaction. If it's absent, then I think that's a red flag. Then the two at the bottom, lack of fairness. What does that mean? Well, supposing there are jobs coming up in the school and someone is applying for those jobs that has the CV and the experience and is not getting interviews, or is interviewed and is not getting the job, and this kind of happens either to them persistently or to others, then it creates an impression that, this is just not fair. We're not on a level playing field here. That position is already earmarked for someone else. Again, the perception and the reality might be different. However, if someone is feeling that, then the way that they are supported in the school is not functioning. It's not working properly, because they should be reassured, and they should be encouraged to look at their own skills.
Steve,
Even
just to play devil's advocate a little bit there, do you think though you said it's not important whether it's reality or not? I, to play devil's advocate, is it though? Because I mean, surely it does need to be based on reality in terms of it is unfair or it's not unfair, and therefore that is important, surely.
well, it's important in terms of the organization, yes,
Mm,
but to the individual, the perception, if their perception is their reality, then they need a support so that they're not feeling like this. But the school needs to make, I always said that if somebody was going for an internal appointment and they didn't get it, it's almost as important for the person who went to the interview and didn't get it to receive support as it is for the person who is being appointed. And I'm not referring to, um, so I'm not referring to the whole school reality. I'm referring to that person's reality. And they
mm.
might well be wrong. But what is happening in the school to support them so that they realize that this is not the case? Because teachers are very self critical. I haven't got it because, and then the lack of fairness might be a defense reaction.
No, I
But
totally agree. I think the bit I was alluding to was sometimes you can be fair by telling somebody the truth
yes, I
and
agree.
actually saying
I agree.
assertively, "Here's the fact, and this is how it is." Whether it
Abs-
be feedback. That was
Absolutely.
the point I was saying. I get what you're saying in terms of supporting
Absolutely.
people. Whatever, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what's happened. You gotta try and help people. But yeah,
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And finally, conflict of values. So it's just gone off the screen now. But conflict of values is the final of the six. And what that means is you came into the teaching profession because you had a set of values about what you wanted to achieve and what you wanted to do for people. And that might be both for pupils and staff. And the more that you get into a leadership position, then you're working to support the staff as well as the pupils. And then you became a head teacher, perhaps, and you have values about why you want to become a head teacher. And then when you get into the job, whether it's as a teacher or a head of department or a head teacher, suddenly you find that your values don't coincide with what you're expected to do. And this goes to the very core and the identity of someone. So if my values are being constantly attacked or eroded or not affirmed, then that is just another factor that can lead to burnout. And
Mm.
often teachers are thinking about leaving the profession, and it takes somebody to say to them, have you tried another school? Because this school and you are not meshing. For some
Mm.
reason, there's a conflict. So before you leave the profession, why not try a new school and see if it's different? Now, there's a book called Making It as a Teacher by Victoria Hewitt, and she had a breakdown. It's in the book. She had a breakdown and she almost left the profession. And then someone said exactly that to her. Okay, well, when you recover, why not try another school? So she, in order to get back into teaching, she went on supply and she tried a number of different schools. And then one
Mm.
of the schools she loved. And she then decided that she wanted to do more supply in that school. A job came up, she was interviewed, and then she became head of history. And she's still in that school.
Mm.
So there's a tendency for teachers who are in burnout mode to think this school exemplifies the teaching profession. This school tells me that that I'm not right for the teaching profession, but actually it may be the school, and it's very difficult for them in an individual position to be able to reflect on that and think, okay, it is worth another go. So those are the 6 factors. So if you have all 6 factors, you're on a high risk of burnout.
Yeah, I mean, just before I pass on to Hannah, I mean, my again, in my career, I'm into my 17th year, and there's only been one time that I would say I've experienced burnout, but it was genuinely hitting all those factors together. And then following that, I needed 6 months out. Really, I didn't have fully 6 months out. I was dipping in and out, but I couldn't have gone from that experience straight into a full-time position. I know Victoria; she's probably similar to that. I haven't spoken to her specifically about that, but I'm sure. And then you can sort of get back in. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. I'll hand over to Hannah now. I think she's got a few more questions to follow up. And hello, Hannah.
Hi. I mean, my situation, it was, which way are you? You're that way, Tom.
Oh,
I
whatever.
went to Tom. I said I was at a point of burnout, and I said I don't know what to do. And you said, don't wait till I was like, wait till the end of the year, and then maybe I'll move school. You're like, no, go now. And actually, I had a DVT and a pulmonary embolism, and that made me go off. And I'd never actually been grateful for an injury before. But I think if I hadn't kind of been forced to take that time out, I would have definitely experienced burnout. From my background is I was in a domestic abuse situation, and actually leaving that situation made me go down the rabbit hole of self help, and my bookshelf is full of all loads and loads of books that I read that help give me the toolkit, and I'm slightly obsessed with kind of trying to give other people it, and that's kind of where a lot of my shows have been on Teacher Talk Radio. And then I'm doing my PG dip in senior leadership, and I've started interviewing a lot more leaders. And the more I interview leaders, the more I realise that it's a very thankless job. There's nobody saying thank you. You just moan upwards. You don't thank upwards. You just moan upwards, and the thanks goes down. And it's such a difficult situation to be in. And reading books like Brian Walton talking about crying in the toilet as a head teacher, like there's so many people being open and honest, and it's really important. But Sunita, where would you suggest a leader or a head teacher look for support?
Oh, it's a great question. I think Tom said this earlier, didn't he? That the people are having the conversation now. And I think that's, just such a huge turning point for everybody in the profession, because it's really good that Steve was supported when his mental health difficulties came to light. And Tom's really pleased to hear that for yourself as well. But there's still isn't enough conversation, but it's certainly since the pandemic, we are actually I'm very grateful to the DfE for acknowledging the support that is needed. So the funding that has been released for senior mental health leads, that's great. That's really, really such a huge, significant, turning point for the profession, because even people that we work with, 5 years ago, people weren't having conversations about mental health, and here we are, and we've been funded by the DfE now to be able to take part in the training and have somebody that is an ambassador of wellbeing and mental health in each school. So I think that, where can you get support was your question. And I was just answering that by saying that actually we're in a much better position, even though, other people may beg to differ. I think we're in the a much stronger position than we ever were. So there is funding from the DfE for this, but there is also funding from the DfE to support the mental health and well-being of colleagues that are working in senior positions. And that tender has been so far held by Education Support. Education Support is a charity that dates back 150 years. I still am, aghast at the number of people that don't know about the actual charity and what they do. And I am, very privileged to be working for them. So we offer fully funded support for senior leaders. That's from assistant head teachers to deputy heads and head teachers. But really, the bottom line is it doesn't matter what your role is in a school. If you're working in a school, you can pick up the phone and there's somebody that you can talk to 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week.
And it's the senior mental health lead kind of course that you do, that's kind of based around Steve's book, Cultures of Wellbeing and Mental Health in Schools. Can you tell us a bit more about the design of the course and how it works?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I might start by talking around the book, if that's okay. So it's a great book. I'm not just saying that because Steve is on screen. He knows that I'm really, really, really proud of the content that's in the book. So the book, Cultures of Mental Health and Wellbeing, is based on 32 case studies of schools. So a whole range of schools, from independent schools, special settings. There's a college and there's an international school, primary, secondary. So a really, really broad representation from lots of different schools in relation to what they do to implement a positive culture of well-being and mental health. It's definitely worth a read. The particular chapter that I would say has been a real catalyst for the training, and I think I love it personally because it encapsulates so much of my sort of personal drivers for the work that I do. So I would wholeheartedly recommend. You don't have to buy the book for this. You could just Google Professor Jonathan Glazard's work on the impact of teacher mental health upon pupil progress, and that was a study that was conducted in 2018. I think it was also done in conjunction with Dr. Anthea Rose, from what I remember. But there's three main questions that the study poses. And the first question is about what factors actually affect mental health and well-being. The second is, how does teacher mental health and well-being impact on the progress of the students and the outcomes that they reach? And I think the third one is Hannah, I know you'll like this, just listening to your description there of what you're obsessed about, and I'm really obsessed about this too, and that's the resilience strategies that are used by highly effective teachers that might have poor mental health themselves, but they still ensure that their students thrive. And I find this really, really interesting and really insightful because in my narrow view, there's two things that an individual can do. You can blame or you can take responsibility, and I'm all about taking responsibility. So I find it a really, really interesting and insightful study. But personally, there are, as I mentioned, there's two sort of aspects that resonate really profoundly. And the one is around that direct correlation of how a teacher's sort of stress levels or mental health or mental ill health, and how that then it is transferred, I suppose, onto student outcomes. And I think when we ran a conference once, and Jonathan Glazard spoke at it, and it really resonated quite deeply because he was sharing about an experience, and his home experiences were actually very similar to mine, but also the sort of description he gave of a teaching experience. And I remember, I was a very studious young person. I did really well at school, in primary school, and then the impact of the mental health started to really surface when I was in secondary school, and I went from I just lost interest in my studies, and it started to show. But despite that, I was really still very committed and studious, as I mentioned. But I had a maths teacher who was highly stressed and very, I wouldn't dare to diagnose him, but I could certainly see now, knowing, looking through the lens that I have the knowledge and sort of understanding now, I would say he would have had maybe some anxiety, some stress, and maybe even some personality disorder type issues. But I just remember walking into the classroom, and maths wasn't a subject that I was strong at. So I really needed a good teacher that was going to be patient with me. And all I would ever do was preempt his sort of gestures. And remember, I'm coming from a home environment where I'm acutely aware. I'm hypersensitive about emotions and feelings and the vibe and the environment that creates. And so I walk into the maths lesson, on a daily basis, and you can imagine what I'm doing. I'm just not really looking or concentrating on the content, but I'm actually really cued into to the teacher, to his mood, to what he's saying, the way he's behaving, his verbal gestures, his non-verbal gestures. And lo and behold, I failed my maths GCSE as a result of that. So that really sort of interests me. And, you know, we're teachers, we take responsibility for our students' outcome. So we have to start with taking responsibility for ourselves. So I find that really quite an interesting aspect of the study. But the other is around those resilience strategies that I was talking about earlier. And, you know, how do teachers employ looking after themselves? How do they employ those strategies? And that's really largely the work that I now do to support colleagues who are taking action, to take the time to be able to gain some introspection, to be able to talk about the challenges that, you know, work is having on them, what kind of impact that's having, to be able to take the time to process, but also acknowledge those difficult emotions, those uncomfortable emotions. And whilst Steve has mentioned about workload being a factor, you know, we know workload is a factor. We know that there is a lot being done, or certainly lots of attempts at reducing workload. But we must acknowledge that teachers typically also behave characteristics. They display characteristics of, you know, being in control. And, you know, all of these are coming up as you'll hear me mention, that Steve's mentioned also. But, you know, teachers are known to be perfectionists. They're known to be aspiring and reaching for really high standards all the time. And that's not practically possible or realistic. So I think it's this aspect of the study that I feel is really, really significant. And if I could do, you know, we can all try and aspire to standards, but ultimately we have two choices. And one is we continue, even though we know it will result in burnout. And two is that we do things differently and we evolve until we feel okay in ourselves about doing less, about doing things differently. And I think it's with that realization, you know, that quote comes into my mind: when you know better, you do better. And I think that's where all of those tools and strategies around coaching, supervision, mindfulness, talk therapy, family support, self-efficacy, asserting boundaries, identifying the support that you need, all of those things that come in. And I think that when we designed the senior mental health lead, it's about looking at all of those strategies that individuals in their role as senior mental health leads can start to be ambassadors for, can start to promote. They can start to lead on those initiatives. They can start to have those you know, those breathe cafes, or talk, making sure that there's space to be able to talk and do everything we can to remove the stigma. So yeah, that we've designed the course really based on our own personal experience as teachers, our personal experience of mental health, but then also having all of those case studies to be able to, you know, really validate that what other schools, some of those successful schools are doing and how it's working.
That reminds me of a previous show. We had a quote about Spinal Tap and why we're obsessed with turning up to 11, when if you could do 5 really, really well, it'll be far more sustainable. And I love the fact that there's a resilience area in this course. I think that's so important. My thing is always you can't control what happens to you. You can only control how you react to it. And then my other one is that, does it help the children? Otherwise, what's the point? Why are you doing it? If it doesn't benefit the students and you're just ticking boxes and adding to your workload, why are you doing it? As long as it benefits them. But as a leader, it's really hard to kind of see through all that fog and kind of see all those different areas. Steve, how step by step does the kind of the process support school leaders?
Okay, so the course is 2 days, and on the first day we cover a range of strategies at a whole school level to support individual teachers and students. On the second day, there's more time given for the people attending the course to plan out an action plan for what they're going to do when they get back to school. Because I've been to many courses in my lifetime, and how often is it that you go on a course, you're really enthusiastic about it, you say in your own mind, right, I need to plan for how I'm going to implement these ideas in school. Then you go back to school the next day. There's been an incident in your classroom while you've been away, and then before you know it, 2 weeks have gone and you haven't made any progress with the action plan. So we give time during day 2 to plan, and teachers can ask us to have a look at the action plan and make a contribution. but also they have a step-by-step online program set out a bit like a course where it takes them through the process of implementing whole school change in terms of staff mental health. And they can dip into that at any time during the 12 months that we give for support. They don't have to follow it lesson by lesson or step by step. They can move from one step several steps forward if they feel that their school doesn't need to put in certain steps. They can omit them. Just to say one more thing about the first case study in the book is almost a verbatim interview with a head teacher called Jeremy Hannay, who is head teacher of Three Bridges Primary School in Southall, London. And Jeremy's school is very high performing, despite the children being in an area of high deprivation. So 30% of children either enter or leave the school in any 1 year, which is very high. And the reason that the school is high performing, in Jeremy's view, and I would agree with him, is that he has no controlled, imposed methods of making teachers accountable. So he doesn't have book scrutinies. He doesn't have learning walks. He delegates lesson observation to 2 teachers or 3 teachers who work in a pair or a group, and they invite each other to their lessons and either ask someone to observe something that is challenging that they'd like some advice on, or alternatively to observe something that is going really well. So all the conventional methods that Ofsted tell us and the DFE tell us are needed in order to make a school successful are not in Jeremy's school. Because of that, the staff, if you look at all 6 factors again from Maslach, none of those 6 factors exist in terms of individual teachers. He also doesn't have a staffing problem. Very few teachers leave the school, but when they do, he's inundated with applications. Now, strangely enough, bit of sarcasm here, his school has not been showcased by the DFE. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is that you have to have strict external accountability implemented internally in order to make teachers accountable. And therefore, because they're accountable, they will improve. And because they improve, the children will get higher scores. That's the narrative. Well, that doesn't exist in Jeremy's school. And he is more than happy to have people walk around his school in the afternoon when the children are in school and see and talk to the teachers about how this school is so successful.
Thanks for that, Steve. So what I'm just to sort of circle back a little bit.
Yes.
And we can, we've talked a little bit about this whole idea that every school should have a senior mental health lead by 2025. Just very, very briefly, do we know how many currently have them? Do we know how many schools currently have a senior mental health lead?
Currently about 50% of schools in England that are eligible have taken up the funding.
Yeah. So just to be clear, this training, this course is and the wraparound support around it is fully funded.
Yes.
As it stands. So just to be clear to everyone out there, this doesn't cost them or the school anything to get this training for someone in the school to become the senior mental health lead. So as it currently stands, and obviously there may be a deadline on that, so get in there now, people, because you never know when these things, stop, so to speak. So, just to be clear to everyone, this is not a, I know we've got on the slide there that there's a special offer and you can invite a second member of staff without charge, but there is no charge to the school or to the individual if they apply with the DFE funding.
No, that's right. And the DFE have released funding now till March 2025, and then there'll be a final round of funding from April 2025. So just to give schools an idea, the funding that they get is £1,200, irrespective of the size of the school. We charge £895 for the 2-day course plus 12-month support. And we also have what we've called a do it for you option, where if they decide to invest the whole of the £1,200, then we will run a staff survey anonymously for them, and we will write a report of the survey results, but also an action plan for that school. But so they don't pay anything. The only thing that they got to fund
thank you. Thank you. So just we'll put up the QR code again for everybody just on screen in full. If you're interested in anything you've heard so far, particularly the senior mental health training for Leeds, and we'll come on to some other things as well. If you're interested in anything you've heard so far, and I know we've just hit 1,500 viewers this evening, so that's fantastic. So thank you very much, everyone who's tuned in so far. But if you are interested, all you need to do is hit that QR code on your phone and then just fill in your email. I know it can sometimes be a hassle, so feel free to do it later when we're finished. Go back, get the QR code, but actually we can also pop up the web address on the ticker at the bottom. We could do that as well, just in case you want to sort of check it out in your own time. Go on, Steve.
Yeah, could I just say, Tom, that, and we'll probably move on to talk about this, the QR code is actually specifically for the handbook that we are...
Oh, no, we've set up a different one, Steve. We've overrided you, and we've just set up one where
so
all they have to do...
taking control.
No, this is what I mean. I don't want you to experience burnout during the show. But we set up one where basically...
Brilliant.
All you have to do with this one, we'll share the other one later. I think, Tom, will we? He's in the background. We'll share it later. But with this one, all you need to do is click the QR code and put your name and email in. That's all it is. And then after this, Steve, you and Tanita can email, get in touch and say, listen, here's the process. Here's what you have to do. Here's how to go about it. But obviously, we'll follow up with more information later. But I wanted to ask you, Steve, next, the programs themselves, you've also designed some training programs for students, right?
Yes.
So, Sunita, I was wondering with this one, whether you could maybe come back in and maybe tell us a little bit about that. I know we've got a little video as well that we're going to play, but maybe before we play that, you can just outline to us what that's all about.
Yeah, of course I can. Just to go back on one of the points that you mentioned about a second person coming along free, that was the second person from the same school. So if I'm a senior mental health leader in a school and it's a huge job, because we know it's a huge job, and that's why we offer the level of support that we do, plus the WhatsApp group, so that we're just making sure that people, because we do get we do sometimes get support staff coming in, pastoral leads, mentors, and to lead a whole school initiative like this is, it's a big responsibility. We do use, I know Steve's talked about the design, but we do use Cotter's change model to be, it's a globally recognized model for change, to be able to take people through a process, and this is a huge process. We're only trying to influence a culture of well-being here, so it's a big responsibility. So if anybody wanted to bring a second person from their school, then that would be perfectly fine. So just wanted to clarify that. Thanks for that. But
so go on, tell us about the students then. Tell us that element, because I find that really interesting.
Well, it's really, really interesting, isn't it, to be able to train people about all of those important things that, you'll see in one of the clips when we show you, when you put the trailer on. But actually,
we've got a comment. Paul has commented online. I completed some senior mental health training 18 months ago. It was comprehensive but helpful. Well, I hope it was through the Teach Well toolkit, Paul. And not some other provider, because they're the best, right? But it's still good that people are getting it done. Sorry, that's a comment from Paul.
Great, thank you for the comment. Thank you. Yeah, we're really passionate about it, and we get great feedback every time our participants evaluate. So I think what's really important is that people have been campaigning for a long time around the education of teaching young people about mental health, and I think that the courses that we have designed around being able to support the mental health leads in their role, I don't think it's just important. I'd say that it's critical if we don't. There's been as I mentioned, there's been a lot of campaigning in the past about the importance of educating young people, but really it has to start at school. And we need to normalize the conversations, as we've mentioned. We need to be able to express our feelings. We need to be able to tell people why it's important to express feelings. And young people need to do this. Here we are, we're all teachers of a certain age. We've been in the profession for, X amount of years. And we're talking about this being difficult for us. And the only way that's going to change is if we start to empower and enable the young people that are, in the classrooms now. So how do we express our feelings? Well, what's the we all know this, we've learned the hard way, just the four of us in this one virtual room today, we've all experienced this the hard way. So why not do everything we can to support these young people? Because when they start to talk about their feelings, guess what it does, guys? It helps you to feel supported. It helps you to feel more positive about life. It helps you to feel less stressed. It helps you to be more confident. It helps you to understand the world around you. It helps you to understand people around you. It helps you to understand how you can communicate with people. It actually just reduces the worries in your life. So why wouldn't we be teaching young people about this? Because the truth is, if we don't, the repercussions of this are that it's going to affect our physical health anyway. There's so much education around our physical health, but actually mental health needs exactly the same level of attention. If we continue to neglect it, then it's going to affect all those things that I mentioned around our relationships with our friends, our peers, our family, our friends. It's going to affect our concentration levels. It's going to impact our studying. It's going to make us feel unsafe. It's going to eventually creep up so that we can't cope with life. Look at the four of us today talking about taking off 6 months, 3 months, years even. Some people have completely come out of a teaching role and not being able to go back. So, we're seeing so much of this, and the only way we're going to change it is through education at school, in the classrooms.
So these mini medics, right?
Can we explain, Tom? Because
please do, because I've seen mini medics pop up. I'm intrigued. So tell us more about that.
Okay. So
also a comment from Sarah just before you answer that. The student course is great. My older daughter's really benefited from it. Thank you. That was a comment from Sarah on Facebook. So cheers for that, Sarah. Go on, carry on. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. So to take mini medics first. So both of the courses are delivered via pre-recorded video. So it really is as simple as a teacher looking at the slides in advance and then playing the video to the pupils. And as you've seen from the clips, we teach the class and the teacher pauses and then facilitates discussions, pair work, interactive questions. Mini Medics comes with a 32-page pupil mental health book, training notes, and also you might have heard of the book Bottled by Tom Brassington. And Bottled is a book that can be read to primary age pupils, and it's all about emotions and talking about them. And this book is being really popular. It's now a global phenomenon, and I think Tom was saying that it's been translated now. So we incorporate a copy of the book so the teacher can read that to the class. So when you bought the video, that video is available for unlimited use within your school. So you can use it again and again and again. The only thing that you would need to provide is the course book after the first showing, if you gave that book to take home for the pupils to take home. So that's Mini Medics. That is designed for year 5 in the primary school. And Student Ambassadors follows the same format. I don't know whether we can get that up on the screen. The other Tom? Yes, thank you. So this, we found that this course or this training can be delivered from year 5 to year 10 in the secondary school. So it works equally well with both. The way that the course is set up is that it's about a 4-hour training session. So it would take the equivalent of, say, a morning in a school. The pupils are trained, as the clip showed, to listen and to make a judgment about a problem that the student was discussing with them, whether that problem could remain with them for the moment or whether it needs more serious intervention. So to give you an example, if the student ambassadors were trained in the if student ambassadors were trained in the summer term in a high school, then they could support year 7 pupils, particularly on transition. So a year 7 pupil could come to an ambassador and say to them, you know, it might be a problem of location. So I've got this lesson with so-and-so in this room, but I don't know where to go. And then the pupil, the ambassador, could help them. But more seriously, a pupil might observe a pupil in year 7, and it could be of any year, of course, but a pupil in year 7 as an example, sitting on their own and looking really sad. So they might go over to the pupil and say, okay, you know, how are things? How are you getting on? How are you settling into the school? Now, that conversation may be enough to set up a relationship where the ambassador might say, well, why don't we catch up in a couple of days' time to see how things are going? But it also may reveal something more serious. And at that point, the students are trained to refer it to the teacher who's responsible for them or to another member of staff if it's urgent. And they're trained so that they don't leave the pupil, they take the pupil with them, and then they report to the member of staff and say, okay, the pupil's in reception and is waiting to see you. One thing that one school did, which I think was a great idea, is they trained their ambassadors, and then I think they trained 20 of them, and then the students in pairs then went to the year 7 form rooms in September, the tutor groups, and they, instead of going to their own tutor group and being registered, they went to the form they were allocated for year 7, and they were with that form for half a term, so that if the pupils needed any help, then there were additional support for the form tutor. And the school found that the year 7 settled in more quickly, that it created a situation where after the first half term, they were able to talk to the 2 members of the ambassador team who had been allocated to their tutor group. It cut down the workload of the teacher, and problems were solved very quickly before they became serious. So that was a fantastic way of using them. We, just to end here, the reason why we deliver this course in particular is because we recognize the potential of students to occupy this role and to be really positive in the school environment. My view is we don't use pupils' abilities enough, and we pupils are great, for example, at handing out textbooks, fine, but this is a really powerful role. And a lot of these pupils go on to be interested in mental health and in support roles. So, and to watch them operate is fantastic, because the pupils are selected by the teacher because they've got the potential to help other people. And it's not anything to do with ability, it's to do with empathy and understanding.
I can completely agree, because my old school, we did this and we had student wellbeing mental health ambassadors, and they wore the badges and they helped the year 7 transition days, and we kind of pointed them all out to the year 7s. When the year 7s got lost, they would go and seek out the year 10s with the badges, and they knew that they could approach those kids and ask them for directions. And again, they would see kids eating on their own and come tell me, and then I would go and help them. So it's really embedded and really builds their confidence. They really do know what they're looking for. So it's really good to be a student wellbeing mental health ambassador. Like, I highly recommend it, because a lot of my tutor group did it, and they were just so confident with it, and they really enjoyed the training. So it's really good to see. And I think that's kind of what embeds your whole company, is this whole idea that it's not just students, it's teachers, it's everybody in it together. We're all in it together, as tonight's show was called, and it's all about kind of both the students and the staff. And I think that's the thing. If you can crack both, you've got a happy school and everyone's kind of thriving. Don't forget as well, if you want to scan the QR code and just sign up with your email, we can let you know more information about Heartfelt Leadership and the Teach Well 2 toolkit. The Heartfelt Leadership, that's like a head teacher manual, is that right, Sunita? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So this is a very recent development through Teach Well Toolkit, something that really quite well, I'm passionate about everything to do with wellbeing, which hopefully everyone can gauge from listening to Steve and I today. I think the inspiration for Heartfelt Leadership Handbook has come from a variety of different avenues, and I think that I'll talk about the kind of why, and then maybe Steve, because he's worked really hard on listening to me. I can't tell you how many times Steve has listened to me in my recent experience as a head teacher.
I'm sure it works both ways, Sunita. I'm sure
we would like to think so, but he's been a great sounding board, because I was I'm just going to share with you one of the really most difficult experiences that I harbored as a head teacher, because I've been doing this work in wellbeing and mental health and being a real ambassador, and I'm really committed to it. But I was working with a member of staff not so long ago who really challenged me. This member of staff was experiencing some difficulties in their own, mental health. And I just did everything I possibly could as a head teacher, with my head teacher hat off, as a coach, as a, supervisor. And I was really beginning to struggle, really beginning to struggle. And I think what really was difficult, and I work with enough head teachers now to know that it wasn't my challenge alone. But I felt that this member of staff was, wouldn't even say that it was a feeling, it was a fact. This member of staff started to accuse me of not supporting them. And I guess you can all imagine how difficult that was for me to be able to handle, because that was far from the reality that I was trying to show. I believe that I went over and above my duty as a head teacher to be able to support this individual. And that's where Steve came in, because I asked Steve to help me with sort of, being able to support this individual. And it gave me sleepless nights. I can't tell you how many sleepless nights. And I know school leaders can certainly relate to what I'm saying here. It was a really difficult situation. And having worked as a coach and as a supervisor with head teachers, I know this is the type of thing that people bring to sort of the session when they're working with me. It really does give you sleepless nights. And some head teachers don't even want to use the word well-being. They don't want to even say the word. It's not because they don't care, but they are just so afraid of the kind of rabbit hole that it might take them down. But so I think in conjunction with talking through the sort of challenge that I was going through in my role as a head teacher, and sort of speaking to Steve and taking advice from HR. I mean, we've kind of come up with this handbook which will support head teachers to be able to manage well-being and having those courageous conversations, but also just to say that HR were instrumental in the advice that they gave me. And the advice there was, Sunita, this isn't about you as a colleague. This isn't about you not wanting to help the individual. This is about the individual taking responsibility for their own mental health. But this is about you carrying out a process. And when everybody understands the process, then we take the kind of the caveats or the complexities out of that situation, because the process becomes really quite clear. And so I think that became a bit of a catalyst for what we have worked on now and created in terms of heartfelt leadership, because I would like to think that I represent my head teacher colleagues out there when I say we really do care. We really, really care about the staff community, wholeheartedly committed to their well-being and their mental health. But equally, there are times when capability, conduct, performance does play a part, as we've just been explaining on the show tonight. And I think that, following a process can be a really important part, so that it's transparent, it's open, everybody understands, it's not personal, and that there is support wrapped around that. So that was really the inspiration around it. Steve, do you want to talk about all of the kind of, because Steve has gone away and done a huge amount of work after listening to me about making sure, because I always say, no, but you got to think about this, Steve, and you got to think about this and this and this, and he's done just that.
Yeah, okay. So so Sunita's explained the why, and this is about the how, really. So when I've seen chats on social media or talked to teachers, sometimes the processes that a school needs to follow are not immediately clear to the teacher concerned, and it leads to a breakdown of communication, and it leads or can lead to further issues. So the handbook is drawn from the Burgundy book, NEU NAHT guidance, employment law. Those are the three sources. And what it does is it gives a head teacher a step-by-step process of dealing with any of these issues. So staff absence is a key part of it. Resolving professional misconduct, issue of capability, grievance, harassment and bullying. So the format, when it's completed, is going to be A4, wire bound, and on one side you've got the step-by-step process, and on the other side you've got a tick box version of the process, so the head teacher can actually follow the steps but also tick or date when a particular step's been followed. And we're going to create PDFs of each of the steps, each of the processes, and the head teacher will have access to an online portal where they can download the PDF and they can give a copy to the teacher concerned, so that everybody is clear about the process, about the steps that are going to be taken, and exactly what follows and what happens next. So teacher and head teacher have a resource that enables them to engage in a formal or informal conversation and process which takes them step by step through it. And one of the things that head teachers have told us is, well, it's one thing to follow the process or to know about the process, but I've then got to investigate how that process should be carried out. I've then got to draw up a step-by-step approach. I've got to look at documents perhaps that feed into that process, and it's so time consuming. And with every good intention, head teachers want to get the process done as quickly as possible, not only for their benefit, but also for the member of staff's benefit. But shortcutting a process leads to problems, because then the member of staff can come back and say later, look, when we had that discussion, you didn't make it clear X, Y, and Z would happen. And now it has happened, and now I've got a grievance against you. And then the whole thing escalates. So authenticity and transparency are key. And that is what we hope the handbook will give head teachers.
Sounds really good. No, it sounds absolutely brilliant. Obviously, if anybody's interested in finding out more, particularly about that, the Heartfelt Leadership Head Teachers Handbook, just scan the QR code that's on screen now, and that will take you through to express an interest in that. Go on, Steve.
Yeah, could I just say that we are going to launch in September. So the QR code will take head teachers to a form, and they can express an interest before launch.
Yeah.
And then we will get in touch with them as soon as it comes
You'll come
available.
back again in the future. Yeah, super. All right. Well, listen, it's been an excellent conversation. I've learned a lot through it, and also about the tools that are available for schools as well, which has been really, really useful. So thank you ever so much, Steve and Sunita, and really highly recommend everybody to just plug in, even if you want to drop them an email there, which is on screen now. You can do that if you've got an interest in anything we've discussed over the last 90 minutes, then definitely do that.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.